Okay, so today's lecture is on classical Greece, and this is Unit 2, Part 3. We're really talking about a guy by the name of Pericles, right? And Pericles is from Athens. What kind of a governmental system does Athens have?
Democracy.
Perfect, democracy. And the guy who's responsible for that, for getting it really democratic as it goes, is this guy, Pericles. Pericles is a statesman, he's a leader, he's a ruler in Athens for a good number of years, for about 30 years or so. He rules or he governs with fairness and with honesty. He's really interested in doing good things for a lot of people. And so a couple of things that he does to promote democracy. One of them is to pay people who are in government. Now, to you and me, that just sounds really normal. You know, everybody who has a governmental job, be it a senator or a president or whatever, has, a salary. But for much of world history, when we have people who are serving in government like that, they're always rich guys, and it's not assumed that they need money from the state, in order to lead the state. So I think Pericles is really one of the first people ever to think about paying people who are running the state. And once again, the reason would be, or the democratic part of that is, there's a lot of people who are citizens, they have some property and they're male and they're from Athens, but maybe they don't have enough money just to not work, so he's paying them so they don't have to work. It opens up these jobs, these ruling jobs, to a lot more people. The other thing that he does, which is really democratic, is instituting direct democracy. He's making it so that everybody who's a citizen can actually vote in person. You can do this in Athens. It's a city that has thousands of people in it. You can't do it in a country where you have hundreds of thousands of people or millions of people, but it's a city-state. So the citizens can come together and vote on issues that are really quite important in a direct way, rather than electing someone to represent them to vote on things. Under Pericles as well, you have Athens starting to take over this military alliance, the supposed defensive alliance. Who were they fighting at this point in time? Or who did they just won wars against? Who kept invading them? The Persians, that's right. And so Athens takes control of this Delian League. Pericles takes control of this Delian League. And they start to treat these other Greek city-states as kind of like part of their empire, or they're taxing them, and they say that they're using this money in order to defend everybody, but really what Pericles and Athens are doing is using that money to beautify Athens. And that's the cultural part of the next EQ. There are these wonderful cultural achievements that are being accomplished kind of on the backs of other Greek city-states. An example of that is the most famous monument in Athens today, the Parthenon. There's the ruins of the Parthenon right there in that picture. This Parthenon is a temple to Athena, the goddess of Athens, Athena, and they have inside there, this has disappeared, but inside of this temple there is a 30-foot tall gold statue of Athena. So it shows you that they're spending a lot of money, other people's money, on beautifying Athens. That's not the only building that they were creating. They're creating a whole bunch of buildings and making Athens really a very beautiful place. People of Athens have a lot of money. They like to be entertained. And so there are people who are writing tragedies and comedies in terms of drama. And people like to go and sit in an amphitheater and watch these tragedies and comedies being performed. So there's a real cultural flowering or flourishing going on at this point in time. Also coming out of Athens around this period of time are philosophers, people who think about how the world works and want to come up with different kinds of ideas, and those ideas then become sort of, what people think about how the sky works, the movement of the planets and the stars, or what matter is made of, or how physics works, or how biology works. There are these philosophers who are coming up with these ideas, or ideas about the perfect form of government. So three guys that you should know would be Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Socrates is the first one chronologically. Socrates is educating some of the youth, some of the young men in Athens. Education for young men is really important in Athens because a lot of those young men will be citizens and have to vote someday. And he teaches them to question. In fact, he comes up with this means of gaining truth, or this means of gaining knowledge, in which he asks questions and gets answers. It's called the Socratic method. And you keep asking questions and getting answers, until you get to an end answer. What Socrates is interested in finding out is what is truth and what is justice. And he thinks by keeping asking question, getting answer, he can come to an absolute what truth is and an absolute what justice is. I think nowadays people don't believe that. They think that truth is subjective and that justice is subjective as well. Sadly for Socrates, he teaches young people, he teaches young men to ask all these questions. The people who are in government in Athens don't like that, and they charge him with corrupting the youth of Athens and find him guilty, and then give him the choice of either being exiled from Athens, he has to leave and never come back, or taking poison and dying. He drinks the poison. He doesn't want to live outside of Athens. He thinks Athens is so great. He thinks that it's unjust what the city fathers are doing to him, and so he prefers to die rather than, and sort of make his point rather than give in and leave. His student, a guy by the name of Plato, talks about a lot of different things, but what we want to concentrate on is his idea of a perfect society and a perfect government type. Plato talks about how the perfect society would be made up of farmers and artisans and warriors with a small number of people as rulers or governors. And those rulers should look among their small group and figure out which one of these rulers is the smartest, which one is the best, which one is the most philosophical, and choose that person to be the philosopher king. And then you'd have this sort of philosophical monarchy. You'd have a philosopher king who is the wisest person who can make all the decisions for everybody. Once again, this has never happened before. It's not like this is anybody's system of government, but he just thinks that this would be the best one. And a lot of people throughout time kind of agreed with him and hoped that really smart people would be in power. Finally, Aristotle is perhaps the most important of these guys for a long number of years, because what Aristotle says about the world, about science, is what people believed for about 1,500 years or so. Aristotle used logic and reasoning and thought in order to come up with the way the world worked. So he thought about biology, how the heart worked and how the brain worked, and thought about astronomy, movement of the planets, movement of the stars, physics, what happens if you drop two weights, one of the weights heavier than the other weight, which one's going to hit the ground first? Or he talks about how matter is made up of 4 different elements: fire, water, air, and earth. So he comes up with all these ideas. They're wrong oftentimes, but essentially they're science for 1,500 years until people start to do what he didn't do. People start to experiment around the year 1400 or so. Before that they didn't. And so, Aristotle says, take 2 weights, drop them, one's heavier than the other one, which one's going to hit the ground first? He thinks the heavier one because he never tries it. But if you and I try it, what we find out is they hit the ground at the same time. So that's Aristotle. Well, that Delian League and Athens abusing these other city-states by taking their money and beautifying Athens, that Delian League leads the Spartans to put together an alliance of Greek city-states that oppose Athens. And Athens gets their friends together in an alliance, and a war breaks out called the Peloponnesian War. So Athens and allies versus Sparta and allies. Athens has a wonderful navy. Sparta has a wonderful army. And so they have a really hard time beating each other in war. Naval power versus a land power. Eventually, the Spartans march on Athens. All the Athenians crowd into behind the walls of Athens. And the Spartans sort of wander around outside of the Athenian walls, burning the crops and chopping down all their trees and making it impossible for them to get food. Food's coming in by ship, that's okay. But a plague breaks out in Athens. It kills Pericles, it kills a whole bunch of Athenians, and it weakens Athens. Years go by, but they don't really ever recover from that. The result of the Peloponnesian War is that Sparta wins. But the effect of the Peloponnesian War is different. Both Sparta and Athens are so weakened by all of these years of fighting that it allows a new group of people, the Macedonians, to take control of all of Greece. So that is your effect? It's really kind of surprising that Macedonia is this part of Greece that unifies Greece and brings the Greeks to their greatest heights of power, because Macedonia is really kind of a backwater. It's the country. It's the far northern part of the Greek lands. Alexander the Great is the leader who comes from Macedonia, who creates the largest empire the world had ever seen up to that period of time. And once again, he's from this part of Greece, not from a city-state, not from a cultured place, not from a civilized place with arts and literature and so on. He comes from a place that's filled with villages. But the people who live in the country in these villages are really tough. And his dad puts together this army that he inherits at the age of 20. And then he's able to use this army to conquer everything that we had talked about in this class, except for China. Another advantage is he's not just some guy from the country who doesn't know anything. His dad gets Aristotle to come teach him and tutor him one-on-one. So he's got really the best teacher of the time. His background makes him tough, but he's also kind of wise and smart because of his education. So he grabs his dad's army and he invades the Persians. The Persians had most of the things we already talked about. He takes Anatolia, or what's today Turkey, from them. He goes into Mesopotamia. He's able to defeat them in Mesopotamia, take that from them, goes down to Egypt, takes Egypt from them, invades Persia, takes over Persia from them, goes all the way even into India, and is beating up on people in India, gets about 200 miles east of the Indus River, and his soldiers say, "Your Majesty, enough is enough. We're done winning. Can we just go home now?" And he's reluctant to, but he has no choice. He says, "Okay, we can go home now." Sadly for Alexander, he gets sick and dies. His empire gets divided between his four generals, and we'll talk about that in just a second. The last thing I want to tell you, though, about Alexander and the Greeks is these tactics that they were using in order to beat up on everybody they faced. These tactics get used by other people, too. They're called phalanx tactics. This thing here, with all of these Greek soldiers standing row by row with shields and these really long spears, this is a phalanx. These guys train together to stick together in kind of a block. And they have these really long spears. When they face their enemies might have swords and axes and other kinds of weapons. Well, they can't even get close to this phalanx of Greeks, because these spears come together, kind of a wall of spear points. So some guy with an axe or a sword can't even get within about 15 feet of the first guy in the first row. He's stabbed to death by all of these spears. This works for a really long period of time. Hundreds of years, this phalanx tactics are winning battles. So this is what happens is you have much of the world that we've talked about, except for China, put together under Greek culture and the Greek language. And cultural diffusion is happening. Greek ideas, Greek language, all being diffused to other people, Indians and Persians and Egyptians and Mesopotamians, all getting these common ideas from the Greeks, all learning about Socrates and Aristotle and knowing about Athens and Sparta and so on. All of the people throughout, well, most of the people throughout this entire territory that Alexander took over start to learn a simplified form of Greek called Koine. They have one language that they can use so that they can talk to each other, they can trade with each other. And this is really quite successful for a good number of years. The knowledge of all of these different places gets put together in Egypt in a new city named after Alexander called Alexandria. They have a wonderful library there, Indonesia or Indian information, Mesopotamian information, Egyptian. It's all coming together so that the world is, a smarter place, or at least a place that comes up with all kinds of different ideas. I think that's it.